John Dursick here in the CAD section at the Ohio Department of Transportation. And in the next couple of videos, I'm going to go over how to set up the OHDOT CEV02 CAD standards, or rather workspace. So in this video, I want to just give a quick overview of how the Connect configuration actually works. You need to make sure you understand this because while our installer for setting up the workspace does configure the workspace, it does not configure how the workspace fits into the whole entire product configuration. Mainly because it's dependent on a custom configuration directory, which I'll go over here in a second. But that custom configuration directory controls more than just our individual workspace, so it's really not for us to take over or set, because it can affect more than just us, especially if you have other clients' workspaces set up. Alright, so you want to make sure you understand that, and I want to be clear that this step of how you configure the Connect products is a separate step that you will have to do outside of our installer. Okay, so first a quick overview of the configuration levels that Connect Edition products offer. So all I'm going to mention here is the organization, workspace, and workset levels. The organization level is new to Connect Edition products, and this is something that will always load. So no matter what workspace or CAD standard you're kind of loading, your organization will always load. And this is a good place to set up things that are specific to your company, like maybe your logo in a cell library or something. The workspace level, that is what we provide, is we provide a workspace, the OHDOT VO2 workspace, which in the next video we'll go over how to kind of get that set up. So you can have several workspaces inside your configuration, and you select the workspace that you want to use. And then workset is really just another name for a project, but it's a workset level configuration or project level configuration. So after you select a given workspace, you would then have worksets that go with that workspace. Alright, so how does all this custom configuration get loaded? There is a variable, it's called this USTN custom configuration. So that variable gets set, and that tells the product, hey, go look here for all of my custom configuration. So again, since this is going to set all custom configuration, I mentioned it earlier, this is why we are not setting it, so this is something that you must do. So how do you set this custom configuration? It's per product, so if you have MicroStation installed or Open Designer and maybe OBM, all of those given products would need the custom configuration variable set. So I have the path here, and you just replace the product name with the given product you're trying to configure. And so there's this configuration setup file that you can open up, and within there you'll see there's a line that says USTN custom configuration, and then you're just going to fill out wherever you want to put that your custom configuration location. Now I do recommend that you leave this pretty generic. Don't put it inside of like an Ohio DOT folder, because again, this is more than just Ohio DOT. This is for all your custom configuration. I see a lot of people do that. It just doesn't make sense to put Ohio here. You'll see later why. Another note is that this variable can also be set when you're actually installing your Connect product. So during the installation of ORD, there's an option that you can specify this custom configuration location. Okay, so this is the main branch to all custom config. That's really what it is. It's just telling the software, hey, go look here to start finding all my custom configuration. Okay, so now how does the software then look at this location and load in the rest of the stuff? It's going to basically start with defaults, right? So I kind of have example folder structure up here. So here's where I specified Connect config, right? And then I have organization folder, a workspace folder, and then inside this workspaces folder I put a couple different workspaces or workspace folders. So these could represent 4 different workspaces, right? So as we go through this Connect config, right, we set our custom config directory. And now, if you had any config files, directly inside here, you can use that config file to maybe redirect off of the defaults. But for the most part, people normally take the default location, so there's not additional configuration that is needed. All right. So summarize, we set the custom config variable. We're going to take the defaults, and the default would be, okay, I'm going to look for organization folder directly inside my custom config location. If any config files inside this folder will get auto included, and that is how you set up your organization level configuration. All right, so that's the default. If you wanted it to be different, you could add a configuration file at this root of connect config, and that you could say in that config file, hey, my organization folder is actually over here. If not, it'll just take the defaults. Same goes for the workspaces. Okay, where should the product look to find the workspaces? So again, the default is workspaces directly inside your custom config folder. So the software will then say, okay, this is the default location. I'm gonna go look there to find any config files. Any config files it finds in the workspaces folder will then get included in the dropdown for selecting a workspace when you load the product. Okay. So then moving on, here's kind of a screenshot, another screenshot. So if I actually looked at the files that were inside workspaces, you can see there's config files, and when you load up the product, you'll see this workspaces dropdown. And when you click that dropdown, you would then see a workspace listing, and those get populated based off of these configuration files. So that means that the configuration files for all your workspaces have to be in the same directory, because that's how this dropdown gets loaded. But the actual workspace folders themselves, if you don't want them right here, you wanted them some other location, organized a little differently, you could do that, and inside this config file, you could then say, you know what, my actual folder structure, I'm going to redirect you over to wherever it is. Okay, so pretty simple stuff. So now that you have a workspace selected, the workset dropdown will get populated. And it's a very similar way that the workspace got populated is how the workset gets populated. Okay, so what it will do is in that config file, in this config file, when you select the workspace, it reads that config file, and this config file will say, hey, go look here for my worksets. So wherever you said to put your worksets, which for O.v2, the default is a workset CFGs folder inside the workspace folder. So that will be the default that we'll go over later when I go through the installer. So the software says, okay, you told me to go look here for my worksets. I'm going to go look at this folder, and I'm going to find all the config files, and all those config files is how I populate this drop-down list. So as you notice, these kind of match up one for one. Same thing with the workspace folders. If you didn't want them at the same location, you can move them. You could do the same thing with your workset folders. So if you wanted these in different locations, they can go to different locations. The individual config file would just say, hey, the actual folder is, wherever it is. Okay, and I'll go over that in some following videos. So that is the basics of how the configuration works, right? So quick summary, you set the custom configuration directory. The software then says, okay, I'm going to go look here. It's going to take defaults unless you otherwise specify. It says, okay, I found an organization level, which you don't have to have set up, but if it is, it would then include that. That says, okay, I'm going to go look here for my workspaces, right? So it's going to take that default, that workspaces folder, and then it's going to populate that drop-down list for your workspaces. You select a given workspace. It says, okay, this workspace config file says to go look here for my worksets. So then I'm going to go look there, and I'm going to go find those config files. And that's how I would populate the workset dropdown. And then you just select your workset, and then when you load that file, you'll get the configuration that you selected. One last note is with MicroStation Connect Edition Update 17, they've added a new capability where you can now set multiple custom configuration location. So prior to update 17, you could really only set that location once in the configuration setup config file that I showed earlier. But now with update 17, they've kind of opened up that capabilities. So when you launch the product, in the startup screen, you're going to see over on the left side a configuration is now shown, and there's a manage configuration option. And then you can set as many as these manage configuration locations up. And so you're basically just going to say, hey, here is my custom config location, right? And so if you had multiples, you could just keep adding them. And then you would just select the configuration that you're wanting to deal with, and then that would populate your workspaces based off of the configuration location that you chose. So that was a nice little addition. So you can kind of easily add more custom config locations. So if you wanted to have like a local setup and a network setup, this makes it a little bit easier now. Okay, so in the next video I'll go over setting up the V2, but this one was really just a quick overview for you guys. I didn't want to go too more in depth. Obviously you can go a lot deeper with configuration, but hopefully that gives you guys at least the base knowledge to know what you need to set up just in general with these Connect products before you get to kind of setting up our individual workspace.